would we look for a trace of this?
I don't know, but I mean the trace, what gives the measure of the universal expansion is the cosmic microwave background radiation.
That's right, and there's argument about whether it's uniform or inhomogeneous.
That's right, but the reason why it's of such very long wavelength is because it's relic light, it's fossil light from the Big Bang. And since the universe has been expanding ever since the Big Bang, light which remains light from that first moment, which has never yet been intercepted by matter. Because when light's intercepted by matter, it stops being light, it's absorbed, unless it's reflected. But this light is light from the original. But since the universe was X hypothesized very, very small to start with, the light was very high energy, the wavelength was very, 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 very short. But as the universe expands, the same light, you see, gets sort of stretched out, and the wavelength goes longer and longer and longer. And this 3.5 K is the result of this stretching process. So its light cooled down to that wavelength corresponding to 3.5 degrees above absolute zero. But nevertheless, it should show irregularities in its wavelength. Irregularities in the change of its wavelength which reflect the novelty wave.
Well, it is true that both at its beginning and its end, the novelty wave undergoes at its beginning a series of balloon-like expansions, which is what these new cosmologies are calling for. Instead of a smooth Big Bang, they're calling for tremendous expansions very shortly after the beginning of the universe in a series of successive stages. So in that sense, you may be right. We were talking before we came on stage tonight, and I was saying that to my mind, in the 10 months since I've seen Rupert but have read The Presence of the Past, I've come to wonder about conceiving of what we're trying to talk about as a field exactly. That what it is its theory of formative causation. The morphogenetic field is just an image of trying to understand how this preformative causation could work. And one thought that has occurred to me about it is the Big Bang is basically tremendous energy, free energy, which, as Rupert described, goes through a series of coolings, and as it cools and energy dissipates and is lost as heat, form emerges. First the form of nuclear chemistry, then organic chemistry, then molecular chemistry, so forth and so on, but progressively more and more complex form as you move toward the point of the arrow of time. Well, rather than visualizing this as a field in which previous states, the presence of the past, where previous states are impacting on successive states, another way you could think of it is energy enters a universe in which at a very great distance ahead of time's arrow, there is a plenum of form, a kind of form of forms, if you want. And if the causality that operated within this form of forms was a two-way causality, then what you would have is the expanding shell of energy that is the universe slowly being influenced essentially by information flowing backward from the future. And so it isn't so much the presence of the past that puts the stamp of form onto things, but that form is an intimation of a future state that is a kind of maximizing of form into a kind of metaphysical hypostatization beyond our ability to conceive. Have you ever considered this possibility? We should have rehearsed that.
Well, I think so. I mean, if I take your description, you see, to be very like, I don't know if you like this or not, the similarity, but like the omega point of Teilhard de Chardin, which he sees as the goal or attractor of the entire universe. If there is to be a model of morphogenetic fields, to come back to one of your earlier points, it has to be in terms of dynamics of some kind. And the interesting thing about modern dynamics is that it's based on the idea of attractors. Systems are attracted towards states which from their point of view lie in the future. So these morphic attractors, which are the basis of the kind of dynamical models, including in chaotic dynamics, that are emerging now. And so that gives the idea, as morphogenetic fields have to have, is the idea of containing the goal or form or final state of something within themselves. The morphogenetic field of the oak tree contains in some sense the form of the fully formed oak and draws the growing seedling towards it. This is like the Aristotelian system of final causes. And so the entire nature of morphic fields is to have attractors. And the only way to model them mathematically that we have something that hints towards it at the moment is in terms of dynamics, including chaotic dynamics. The idea of non-stable endpoints or dynamic endpoints. And if one has a model of the universe based on those, and if one has also, as one does in this kind of organismic holistic universe, the idea that the microcosm mirrors the macrocosm, that the part in some sense mirrors the whole. So each system is in some way related to the whole. Then the morphic field of the entire universe must have a kind of cosmic attractor from that point of view, which is drawing the universe towards something. So that instead of, this would then, you see, lead to the view that even the flux of energy has another side to it, because we normally think of the Big Bang pushing matter out from behind, everything being pushed from last. And the Big Bang is certainly, that model is an explosion. It's the original impetus of the explosion, which is pushing galaxies and the whole universe apart. But the idea of an attractor is that it's not being pushed, it's being pulled. And the energetic causation, as we know it, is based on a pushing principle, and formative causation is based on a pulling principle towards a kind of goal or form or an attractor.
So placing it in the future is not that inappropriate.
Well, you see, if one has the idea that the universe as a whole has a morphic field, which has a morphic attractor for the evolution of the entire universe, then what could that attractor be? And we don't know what it is. It might be a kind of ever receding attractor, so the universe would just go on expanding forever and forever and forever, with an endless creation of new forms with no end. That's one possible kind of attractor.
That's one possible view.
But if there's an end, which is what the entire Judeo-Christian myth of history leads us to believe, and we're within the field of a Judeo-Christian myth of history, whether we like it or not. The whole cult of progress depends on it. And the idea that there's some kind of end or goal of history is deeply rooted in our entire culture. It comes out in some forms, you know, Star Wars and these kinds of visions of the future, of the ultimate nuclear war, and of and mostly images drawn from the book of Revelation. These are things that happen at the end of ordinary history before the coming of the millennium. Plagues, famines, seas and rivers turning red to blood, fire from heaven, and finally the great war in heaven. Signs of the end, which many of us can easily find very plausible. The approaching of a new millennium means we're absolutely bound to have a vast outbreak of millenarian prophecy, of which you're one of the earlier exponents.
Thank you very much.
But